Bob Kaufman, a poet of the Beat generation, lived from 1925 to 1986. He often seems to be overlooked when people discuss African American poets, partly because he was a Beat writer, and he's often seems to be left out of a lot of Beat histories because he was a black writer. So he kind of fell between the cracks. He's also famous for taking a very lengthy vow of silence. Not that he was exactly silent, but he kind of withdrew from the public eye for over a decade. He was active in both New York and San Francisco, major centers of the literary Beat movement. His earliest known poems were published in Beatitudes, a San Francisco-based magazine he co-founded with Allen Ginsberg and other Beat writers in 1959. In that year, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, owner of City Lights, published Kaufman's Abominus Manifesto and other poems as broadsides and pamphlets. Kaufman's poetry collections include 3 published by New Directions: Solitudes Crowded with Loneliness in 1965, Golden Sardine in 1968, The Ancient Rain in 1979, and after his death, Coffee House Press published Cranial Guitar, selected poems by Bob Kaufman in 1996 that was edited by Gerald Nicosia with an introduction by David Henderson. Bob Kaufman was born into a large African-American Catholic family in New Orleans. It's possible that his father had a German-Jewish ancestor, but their family was effectively Catholic. And Bob Kaufman died as a Buddhist. He may have inherited the urge to travel from his father, who worked as a Pullman porter on trains traveling between New Orleans and Chicago, and his love of literature from his mother, a school teacher who inspired her children to read literary classics from the personal library she acquired by purchasing books at estate sales. As a teenager, Bob Kaufman joined the Merchant Marine and traveled around the world, something that Jack Kerouac and Langston Hughes also did. Kaufman was politically active as a member of the National Maritime Union. He was maybe a little bit too radical for the Union. He was actually kind of purged out of the Union at a certain point. And from the 1940s to the early 50s, Kaufman was based in New York, where he briefly attended a new school and met writers Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac. For a time, he actually was living in the same building with Ginsberg. Kaufman moved to San Francisco by 1956, returning to New York around 1960, and then moving back pretty permanently to San Francisco, where he remained a fixture in the North Beach area associated with the West Coast community of Beat writers. Kaufman became one of the original members of the Beat movement through his interest in literature and music. He associated with jazz musicians such as Billie Holiday and Charlie Parker. His son is named Parker after Charlie Parker. And he associated with Beat writers including Ginsberg, Kerouac, Ferlinghetti, along with African American Beat poets Ted Jones, J-O-A-N-S, Leroy Jones, J-O-N-E-S. Kaufman's poetic style was inspired by the rhythmic improvisation of bop musicians, and he often performed spontaneous poetry in North Beach venues such as the Coffee Gallery and Coexistence Bagel Shop. It's legendary that he lived a life of extreme renunciation. He dedicated himself to poetry. He lived and died poetry. He often composed his poems orally and didn't even bother to write them down. Sometimes other people took dictation and wrote the poems down. Sometimes he wrote them, but he didn't bother to publish them. Sometimes he wrote them, left them on the desk, threw them on the floor. Sometimes other people gathered up loose leaves of poems and put together books so that his work could get out to a larger audience. But he very deliberately chose a marginal life rather than having marginality imposed on him. And I think that he, in some sense, declared and dedicated himself to what I would call the antithesis of a literary career.